Hello folks, this is Vlad aka Whiskey Foxtrot. Last week we had the unboxing of the Acer Nitro 5 based on the Ryzen 5 2500U and RX560X GPU. And today we're going to take a look at benchmarks as requested by viewers. Stay tuned. And before we continue, I want to send you to the Acer website. You go to acer.com, look up the Nitro 5 product, and also make sure you have your serial number. You will need that in a second, or your model number at least. Go to drivers or support drivers and manuals, put in your model number. Mine is the -42. If yours is something different, put that number in and get those drivers, but the same will apply anyway. There's only a Windows 64-bit version. So here I have the drivers and the BIOS. Download the BIOS first. It is an executable in a zip file. Extract that and run it. Caution, of course, make sure you do not interrupt or you have anything else running. It will have to reboot on its own. Do not interrupt it. You will have a break. Anyway, continue on. Next thing to download is the Vga Driver from Acer. You want to download their driver. It is the easiest way to do this. Currently it is from October 8th. Download and install that. Also make sure you update Windows. Make sure it's up to date. Current updates and all that good stuff up to 1803. And if you're unlucky, 1809. Hopefully all those issues have been resolved by the time you see this video. Probably not. Anyway, enough yakking. Do all the updates as I mentioned here per your model. And let's take a look at some games. The Acer Nitro 5 is very capable of handling a lot of esports titles and some AAA titles, as you will see in a minute. First up is, of course, Quake Champions. At 1080p medium I was getting 46 frames per second, and at 720p on high I was getting 68 frames. I am going to continue on with the 1080p on medium and 720p high where possible, so we'll see some variations and I will notice or mention them. And next up we have Overwatch. Overwatch, of course, another popular title, very smooth, and it runs at 62 frames per second at 1080p medium, 720 high, 720p high at 70 frames. And the method I'm using right now is just plain old MSI Afterburner, so that is, it gives me everything I need, the numbers. I run every game 3 to 5 times and take the average from that, the low and highs. There is some discrepancy with that because some games read lower than others. They have some dips, very small dips at really low numbers when it's loading. So that is probably not the best number to get to, but you get the average, you get the idea. If there's a big discrepancy, I will mention it. And following we have PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, 1080p, 38 frames per second, 1080p medium. At 1080p low, I was getting somewhere in between the 42 and 48 frames per second. At 720p high, I was getting 54. Most of the gameplay was actually a lot higher on 720p high. And Rainbow Six Siege, probably one of the most requested gameplays or benchmarks on the Acer Nitro 5 laptop. I was getting a 93 frames per second on 1080p medium and 720p high at 117 frames per second. It was definitely pushing it up there. So definitely very playable on the Acer Nitro 5. And we also have Battalion 1944. It is still in beta or in pre-release or early access. Get it right, Vlad. It is 1080p medium. Surprisingly, I was getting 38 frames per second, but on 720p high I was getting 78 frames per second, and it has actually been a lot higher than that, but that's the average. And one disappointment on this laptop was Call of Duty Black Ops 4. It was not playable on 1080p, not with the current driver. So hopefully Acer puts out some newer drivers or uses the updated drivers. So that's one thing to keep in mind with laptop drivers. They get them from AMD or however the process works, but they are through AMD and then they update them for their specific implementation, their specific hardware. So Acer still has to update or catch up on the drivers as AMD is putting them out. On my desktop I have no issues with Call of Duty or any of these games for that matter. But there you go, 720p high. I was getting around 37 frames per second. Not very playable because it was still choppy, even though, you know, it was pushing up over the 30 frames per second. Not for a competitive shooter, not in zombies, not in squad or quad, and definitely not in the Battle Royale mode. Not recommended.
Target eliminated.
And Ghost Recon Wildlands, the PvP portion of Ghosts, that was one of my favorites. It actually played, even though with the low numbers, it is still very playable. 1080p medium, stays in the 42 frames per second, and at 720p at 52 to 54 frames per second. So definitely well worth looking into if this is one of your games you want to take on the road with you. And another highly requested game was Far Cry 5. 1080p medium, about 40 frames per second, and 720p high. I was getting 60 frames per second. Very playable. There are some times where it will drop down, so be prepared for that. Nothing crucial. Regular gameplay is fine. Just some of the cutscenes or coming out of the cutscenes is where I've noticed some frame drops. And last but not least, we have Rocket League. 1080p medium, 64 frames per second, and at 720p high, it's getting a 86 frames per second and very steady around that number. It is one of those numbers, one of those games where it doesn't really vary much. No huge variances. Overall, in all the games, smooth gameplay. And like I said, in Far Cry 5, there are some areas where it just dips for a split second. It is very noticeable to me. So 720p is probably the best. Ghost Recon Wildlands, also smooth gameplay, even though it tends to jump to the GPU or the CPU by default. Anyway, folks, there you have it. If you have any questions or would like to see anything else that I haven't played here, update it or add it to the list, let me know and I will take a look at it if I have it or as time permits. Again, we're very dependent on driver updates from Acer, from AMD to Acer. So whenever Acer gets the updates out, I am pretty sure that all these games that are having issues right now will also run just as smooth as the next game. Again, my name is Vlad, aka Whiskey Foxtrot, proud AMD Red Team member, proud member of the AMD stream teams. Catch me on the AMD channel at twitch.tv/AMD on Tuesdays from 5:30 p.m. Central Time to 7:30 Central Time, and also on my own channel at twitch.tv/Whiskey Foxtrot Actual. It's the same name as my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Whiskey Foxtrot Actual. Again, thank you all for watching this video. If you have any questions, put them down below in the comments and I will respond. Take care and have fun.